I really feel like the data is what really made everyone say, okay, we're able to now combat this narrative with statistics, data, and not just, we all, there's always an but that's essentially what this particular handout was great for, and the training in general. Like, I just cannot stress how amazing this training was. But just off the bat, African Americans are 2.3 times more likely to experience infant death. That's from the CDC. African Americans are 3.7 times more likely to be suspended in K through 12 education. African Americans are 2.1 times more likely to be in foster care. African Americans are 7 times more likely to be incarcerated as adults. And African American business owners are 5.2 times more likely to be denied a loan. So those are just some of the basic stats. And this is across the board. This isn't North Carolina. This isn't Washington State. This is essentially across the board, anywhere you want to go. And the other thing that I think was truly beneficial, we didn't get to read our second book in the training. We just got really sunk into white fragility and everybody else conversing with each other. And I think that one of the things that I have learned, I'm a librarian at my community college, and I have a master's degree in history, a master's degree in library and information science. And still, with all this education, I don't ever know enough to be able to really have a good education base in delivering this type of data. So we have a great book list that was supplied, of course, by various members of the Training Academy. We were able to speak to each other. The books that I have read this year recently are Ibram Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning. Excellent book, gives a great amount of history. And then another book that I've also read, How to Be an Anti-Racist. But I feel like I've never enough, like I've got to know more and more. So I would just say, as a librarian, we're always learning, everyone is learning. So those were some of the most exceptional things from my point of view from this training.
All right, well, with continuing with what we thought was exceptional, I'll touch on the real talk, the real deal that was set at the table for us, those courageous, brave conversations. So we were able to get to the heart of the matter with equity, and that is through dialogue, through expressing oneself, through the collaborative integration of different concepts and perspectives of others. That's what the Equity Coach Academy brought forth. As mentioned earlier, the coaches and I had the opportunity to engage in an interactive session with Dr. Angela Davis and Abraham Donez. Those are my neighbors out at Durham Tech. What resonated for me was the emphasis that was placed on the self-work that would be required to continuously, not just for the moment, but continuously evoke social justice change. That long-term, that hardcore, sometimes heart-wrenching work that we may not dive into day to day. And as noted with our Equity Talk to Equity Walk book reading, I know that's going to be placed in the chat a little later. This book we didn't dive into as much, but from the feedback and the information that we've gained, we understand that we are the drivers for change. We have been charged to lead right from our seats, right where we are. So the equity work begins within each of us, right? Regardless of our roles, regardless of our titles, regardless of our pay grades, leading from right where we are was vital to our conversation. And Savvy mentioned she's a librarian. I work in career services in Title IX. We have Michael here as a professor. We all come from different walks, but through these conversations, we were able to place all of those differences, those contrasts, as well as similarities at the table. We encountered things of intentionality and acknowledgement. They flow throughout all of this segment of training to ensure that we focused on the aspects of for what and for whom we are seeking to promote equitable access and equitable outcomes. So just taking a few steps, I know we're talking about what resonates for us, so taking a few steps to consider my own roles and responsibilities as a career development professional, as a Title IX coordinator, as a DEI Council co-chair, all of those different roles. The reflection of the why must stay at the forefront, regardless of what setting, what population, the why is vital. So I must take that personal responsibility in taking action. Even before I'm sitting it before any other platform, before any other collective group, I must say to myself, what is the why in this and how am I moving forward? So I must reflect on what motivates me and the vision that drives me to empower, to support, to engage my college community through those courageous, brave conversations. As noted by Dr. Davis, we are the students we serve. Again, we are the students we serve. And in this equity work, I'm reminded that the amplification of our students' voices, the amplification is ultimately advancing our own, that of our own. And we know that it takes a village. It takes a village, right? That holistic perspective and support, that equity work, the work that's in the best interest of our entire community, our students, our faculty, our staff, our extended community. What is the good for the entire community? That must be at the forefront. What is the good for the entire community? And within that, are we meeting the needs of those who need our support, who need our guidance, who need our resources the most? So within all of that stimulating dialogue, we were charged here to create a space for conversation through a reflective session. We were provided those tools and the insight on leading effective diversity, equity, and inclusion sessions. So these nuggets were inclusive of engagement, self-reflection, and homework. We created, and you can see here this blurb that's on the screen here on our slide here. We were able to create a brief 10-minute presentation within our groups on the topics outlined right here. So some groups spoke to the Board of Trustees, others spoke to student groups, others spoke to faculty and staff. So wherever you were in this process, you took on the role of leading a team meeting and then speaking to the constituents. So let me tell you, Dr. Davis, if you don't know, she took role playing to a whole different level. She really did. So if you don't know her, you got to get to know her on that level. Dr. Davis took her acting skills next level off the meter. But within that, it was just a great experience because the place that we were in the process allowed us to see a different side of things. We were the presenters, but at the same time, we gained that realistic approach to expect the unexpected, right? We had some ideas of what questions would be asked, but when the role playing was laid down, oh my goodness, we didn't have a clue of what was to come. And that's what we needed. That's what we needed to hear and be engaged with to in this work, because you don't know what that next question or comment or piece of feedback may be. So it was perfect. And it lightened the mood to some degree. And then it made some of us nervous who had to go later on in the session. But I think my group did pretty well. What do you think, Michael and Savvy? We did pretty good. It was a great time for growth and challenging the narrative. And that was what it was all about, challenging that narrative. So within this space, it was emphasized that there must be alignment of equity work with the goals of our campuses and the system initiatives that we're dealing with. So we were encouraged to be committed to acknowledge, to correct, to address the imbalances that our institutions are faced with, again, with intentionality. I'll turn it back over to Michael.
All right, well, it's mine. So Dr. Davis was indeed interesting, a fascinating person. At times I wasn't sure when it was acting or it was a real thing. But so mine, probably my biggest takeaway was on the final day. And I learned throughout the session, but my perspective, I think at times ruffled other feathers or many people's feathers during the training, which was also good. And just a little bit of background, and it took me a while to get to the place where I am. I am from Jamaica. And so while right now, like in the United States, so race and equity is at the forefront. I didn't grow up in the other world or the otherism world or any of those. So it was really difficult for me coming to the United States and sort of like getting into anything race, diversity, any or that, because I grew up where the powers that be looked like me came from where I came from. My teachers were Black, my doctor was Black, my prime minister was Black. So to excel was easy for me. And getting to the United States from a would-be developing country, third world, to the first world, kind of like it was, what is wrong? It was more, I was in that same space. What is wrong with these people? What these people? I was also part of the otherism sort of thing. And so on the last day, you know, I've been, okay, I have to do X, I have to do Y. And then it's, where do we start? How do we do? We are from all these different places. How does it go? And then these three presidents came on and they started talking. So Dr. Pamela Senegal from Piedmont Community College, J.B. Buxton from Durham Tech, and Dr. Janet Briggs from Forsyth. And so each of those presidents started talking about the work that was taking place on their campus. And that's what actually brought me to sort of the realization of how different we were, because I thought that we could get this pen and make these broad strokes and make changes wherever. I mean, we have 58 community colleges in the system. We just go in and strike this thing down and put this other thing, you know, but so like Dr. Buxton talked about the things at Durham Tech in terms of like intentional outcomes that he had for the college. Like he had these 13 specific actions that they wanted to ensure that took place. And where did this start? It started with a actual book study and pilot project that they did. The one really, I guess, that brought it home for me, however, was Dr. Pamela Senegal. And she is from Piedmont Community College, which is a rural college. And she spoke about the difficulties that she had, especially with the board of trustees and those, you know, and how, and that gave me sort of the realization that, okay, this is not just one of those where you could just go in and change what you want. The resistance is going to come from probably where you least expect, or the people you trust the most, you know. But she spoke about the changes and how you get these unintentional consequences and the constant struggle that goes on. And from there, I think I had myself a better outlook on how difficult this task was going to be and what it would take to go in. So taking that back to my community college and then running into my president, Dr. Don Thomas, and he spoke about the work that the North Carolina Community College Systems Task Force had taken on, and sort of like the final recommendations that they had. They did this over the period of the pandemic pretty much. And so they had 3 basic recommendations speaking about the elimination of RDS requirements for North Carolina Community College system. And this is one of those major barriers for students having to establish residency. And I mean, I do have firsthand experience with that. My 2 children are born here, but I had to appeal and do a lot just to get them residency. And I mean, I sort of had the know-how, but it was still a difficult thing. Address language or make language specific things with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion. And right now, I think a lot is just sort of brushed over and it's sort of business as usual. So this to me is also one of those major areas that I think that the system is doing or trying to get this done. And then just in terms of strategies to eliminate like unnecessary debt, small fees, library fees, like parking fees, like little bitty deterrents that prevent students from gaining equity outcome within our community college system. For me, however, as the DEI co-chair, as an equity coach, this doesn't necessarily go as far as I think that we can go or should go. And so one of the mandates that I received, like from Dr. Boston, would be that we can make a deep dive into and look at documents, look at statistics, bring this to the forefront and go from there. So we don't necessarily have to align with the business as usual. And so for me, this was probably the most interesting portion of it, like how difficult the task is.
So I'll jump in. One of the best things about this training is that Dr. Battle and the facilitators responded to what we had to say as a group. So we had reflection sessions during and after each session, not only for ourselves, kind of take home homework, but we were able to talk to each other a little bit as the group. We were surveyed. We took ultimately we took a pretty long survey. We were interviewed as well by an outside source. And really there was a true immediate response to assessment. Dr. Battle, did you want to talk any more about this?
I just wanted to reiterate that So after every session, as Savvy mentioned, we had an opportunity for participants to reflect on what they had learned. If they wanted to, it was optional. And in some instances, I would send questions by email after the sessions asking people to reflect. And then we later employed ASA Research, who did a formal assessment with focus groups and surveys. But it allowed us to immediately respond to make the training better. So if someone said as a reflection that they wanted more time in the breakout sessions, they felt like they were rushed. Well, in the next time, we allowed more time for that. So we tried to be responsive very quickly to address the concern so that we could try to get as much value out of this training as possible. So that's all I would add.
So with that in mind, we wanted to talk a little bit as a group about things that we thought could continue to improve. And we know that that there will be a response, of course. And I'll let Laura start.
Or okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'll take this one. So in terms of continued improvement, one of those was focus for me. So for this particular cohort, I think the entire focus was on Black or African American or people of color, sort of. But I thought, and I made those suggestions to Dr. Battle and in the interviews and stuff like that, that in order for there to be a wholesale or overall change within the United States and in terms of diversity and equity, then we do need to include all groups or all minority groups, all underserved groups within this. So, because I think if we somehow have a corporate effort, if African Americans can support LGBTQ, if they could support Asian Americans, if we all could support each other, having a common goal and good, then I think the outcomes can be a lot better if we just did more collaborative stuff.
Yeah, and I'll second that. It was, you know, I think that we talk about finding where you are. Like any of the books that we have read there's always a chapter or there's always this story of you've got to establish where you are and move and continue to educate yourself. So the point is that yes, we thought that the training could have incorporated more others, so to speak. But it was fantastic because we just don't get this education, right? This is not the type of education any of us has ever received unless we sought after it. So 6 months of training was wonderful, but really this is the kind of thing that you have to do every day, every month, and work on yourself. So we would have liked to have seen a little more diversity within the training, but the readings were phenomenal. I thought I had not read White Fragility yet, and I really felt like it made a lot of sense. It resonated with me personally. I continue to read. You know, it's a difficult path. It's something that we all have to do all the time. And I think that too, the other part of this is taking the time to absorb and use this. So we have all this data and we're finding like we need to assess this with a different narrative. We need to look at this in different ways. Groundwater training, like I was speaking about earlier, we have to learn how to adapt and evolve. So this is a team effort, and I'm really empowered by how many people are starting to pay attention. You know, and I think that is one of the things, absorbing the information that we're going to be able to pass on to others, and then having those interpersonal skills that we've learned as coaches to be able to disseminate that information. And really, truthfully, what I have learned is that you've got to have this top down, you've got to have the support of your faculty, you've got to have the support of your institution for sure. But change happens every day with conversations. And it's a slow process, but we all I have to check myself, you know, I have to continue to grow and give myself grace and others grace to grow as well. And that means as a librarian, I've always got to be finding the next great book, you know, the next book, the next level. And that's part of what we do. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but part of what we're starting here at Southwestern Community College.
And I can jump in here. From my perspective, team engagement was one of those highlights of our training sessions. To engage in this critical dialogue and just sharing unique experiences with my colleagues from across the state was invaluable. Each and every breakout session, we had this opportunity. And as it was mentioned earlier, the time flew by. That was probably my comment that came in. I need more time with my people. My lived experiences in the Triangle area with my students, faculty, and staff hold a few similarities to Michael and Savvy's experiences at Southwestern Community College in the western part of the state. However, there were tons of contrasts, tons of things that we didn't have a clue existed on one end or the other that were brought to the forefront. As you can imagine, very eye-opening, dealing with resources and allocation of those resources and interaction with our larger communities, very different on some levels. And once we seem to get to the heart of those conversations, we make those quick adjustments and transitions back to our training session. So I think that was my comment. The precious time with my colleagues and my cohort, during those times, I just couldn't get enough of. In this world of COVID, the human connection for me resonates in so many different ways than it did before. So having this time to connect with thought leaders and having the space to dissect this information, again, a lot of readings, a lot of data, it was truly meaningful for me. Also, just bringing to light here that although it was encouraged to connect beyond our breakout groups, this time was limited. I know many of us have roles and responsibilities. Once we left, many of us were running to the next session or to the next meeting, immediately following our group sessions, our training sessions. So one thing that I also would encourage is connection beyond these breakout groups. And I've had the opportunity to do so with my teammates right here, being able to use my cohort as a resource group after the sessions have concluded. So knowing I can lean on this group at any point to ask any question, how are you running those courageous conversation sessions at your school? What kind of campus climate survey are you using? What's working for you? The opportunity is there. So I'm grateful for having the touch points that we did have during this time.
So we'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing at our individual institutions. I'm going to let you take it away, Michael, because you're
all right. So since the coaching cohort or Durham, Savvy and I initially were, because we were equity coaches or doing equity training, we were placed on the DEI committee at Southwestern Community College for the rest of the year. And then for this academic year, I was selected as a co-chair for the DEI committee. And since then, we've done a lot of work, so backtracking a little bit, when we did that survey where we stood as a person, as an institution on the first day. And in all honesty, we couldn't score below 0, and that's probably why we didn't end up with a negative number. Because I had probably, I think Dr. Battle probably has that thing that we could share it with you, but it really was really poor. But to say from there to where we are, that we've grown like light years in terms of as an institution and what we're doing or what we're trying to do. We've had these so one of the stuff we've had so far is for the DEI committee to have courageous conversations, bring up these difficult topics and talk about them and share and put yourself in that vulnerable place. And, I think it has brought us closer together. It has also shone the light on the difficulty that it will be to do DEI work, but also it has been encouraging in terms of where we're going and what we want to do. And I think we have also created a lot of allies, which is what is actually needed for this kind of work. On the public schools, and so this is sort of my personal pet peeve as to taking DEI to public schools. I've been taught in public schools for a while. That was probably the most difficult setting that I've been in the United States since I got here, because there is no diversity, equity, or inclusion from the public school setting in terms of just the education, the value of the students, so even at the local high school, like right here, students, a white or a brown student could graduate the same year, having played the same sports, the same things. And when you look at their transcript and what each of them has done in school or was encouraged to do, then it leaves a lot to be desired to say. So for me, taking this to public schools and addressing these issues is one of those big things for me.
Yeah, sure. So I'm also on the DEI committee, and it just got started with a book club last year. We just started doing book clubs. We read Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. That was our first real awesome DEI experience. And I think that book club has really helped out a lot. Like I say, I think that a lot of this information becomes really stuff that we don't want to talk about. You have to have a courageous conversation. And when you bring a book with all this information and the time to allow people to absorb that information, you can have a really sincere conversation. So I was asked to join the DEI committee, and we decided as a group to have to focus our professional development day, which is a day where once a semester, faculty, staff, employees get together and have some sort of training. And we focused this year, it was actually last week, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had amazing sessions. The whole day was awesome. We had a session on courageous conversations with how to have those conversations with your student, where we picked various stories in the news that were going on that week that have been politicized. We had a session on accessibility, how to really use universal design, why it's important when you are in a world of your classes being online or whatever, in whatever scenario. And then we also had a session on mental health, on telling your story and owning who you are, owning your own diversity. Some of the things that we're working on moving forward in the DEI committee, and I'm not the co-chair, Amanda Allen is the co-chair, but some of the things we're working on is a land acknowledgement for our school and being on Cherokee land. We are desperately working to get that taken care of. Should have been done. But I feel like with the professional development that we have done and with the training we have had, my key takeaway is grace. Like, I am always learning. We all always have to be learning, and we all always have to be pushing. But we have, those baby steps. It's a huge step for our community college to have a professional development day devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we just keep making those steps, and it is nice to see that there are a lot of people on board when we do make these larger steps.
All right, at Wake Tech, where should I start? Our strategic planning process is now fondly known as Reach and Rally. I know I have some of my colleagues on the line here, so we know Reach and Rally verbiage quite well. The beauty of all of this is that the Reach and Rally planning and implementation phases align directly with the timeline of our Equity Academy. So over the course of this past spring and current fall semesters, both just feel right in line. It was quite timely for us to be engaged, to say the least. And we know alignment on every level is invaluable. My partner in the Academy, Robert Mayhew, and I were able to confirm and validate many of those proposed strategies and data points, next steps that we were privy to in the Academy, and we're able to say, you know what, we're on the right track. Or you know what, we're way off track and we need to get things moving forward. So it's just an amazing feeling to be able to go back to my team and to say, yes, we've got it. And the fact that, again, we have this network that's built that we can always rely on. So we acknowledge that we have a long way to go in moving the needle on equity, and challenging the narrative is key, but we have been making headway, and that's what matters. We've been making headway over the past few months with several strategies that stemmed out of Reach and Rally, but aligned with our Equity Academy mission. And so with that being said, we're so proud of our inaugural DEI Council. We are so thrilled that our council is up and running. It was initiated this fall semester. Even though, of course, we have pockets of DEI teams and initiatives and goodness throughout the college, most definitely, we now have a core team, a cross-functional team comprised of staff from every sector of the college, every division of the college. We are very intentional. Also, a faculty from various divisions of the college, most definitely, and students. Those voices have to be placed at the table. Within this DEI Council, we have designated 5 work groups to support major initiatives that have been set forward. And these 5 work groups are student success, engagement communications, workforce initiatives, education, and campus climate. So each of the 5 groups have met over the course of the last couple of months. We have, of course, through the strategic planning, some ideas of initiatives that will be taking place, that will move forward, but this team is rallying around many of the missions that are not on the strategic plan timeline. Some things that maybe would resonate with a smaller group within the college or could cross paths with several different teams across the college. So we're coming together, looking beyond the strategic plan to see what else, what more can we offer to our college community. In our initial meeting this semester, we conducted a virtual privilege walk as a way to unpack ourselves, our feelings, our emotions, and ultimately show vulnerability. Many of our teammates had never experienced this activity. And for me, being in this world, it's like, wow, this is an activity we do everywhere with every mission that I'm involved in. And many of my teammates had not experienced this moment. So it was emotionally and psychologically intense for some, most definitely. However, it brought so much light to our pathways that when I put it into perspective, it all led us to the moment in that first meeting as the DEI Council on that day. So just phenomenal times with meeting new people, bringing together those thought partners, just amazing time that we're having. And I have a few of those members on now, so thank you for being here and supporting. In our most recent session, we conducted an overview of this Equity Coach Academy training. So we were given some insight on what this academy was all about. We brought to light some of those interesting activities. We made sure that it was understood that our connection to the academy stems far beyond the conclusion with that certificate. So many were fired up after the session. I was gaining emails on, hey, how do I get selected? What's the process? And of course, we know things may transition in a different way this go around, but to know my colleagues were interested in taking the torch on to the next level was meaningful. And it's through the DEI Council that we were able to discuss what this is all about. Now, our next step with the council will be to host listening sessions for each of the work groups. I mentioned the 5. The thing about that is we want to make sure that our entire college community has a voice in what we're doing, not just the set 5 or 6 individuals who are on that work group or who are within the DEI Council, but our entire college community having a voice, understanding what our next steps are, being privy to some of the funding that's involved and what is allocated to. We want to make sure we're transparent in all that we're doing with the DEI Council. So we have some listening sessions that are taking place, and the first is slated for December, which is, oh my goodness, in like 2 weeks. So we're getting this up and running and into the new year, being able to bring our community together, not as a gripe session, it's not intended as that, but it's a way to place voices at the table for the entire college community. I also have here our Summer Bridge program that was birthed out of our Pathways Student Success Scholars Program, male mentoring program, an initiative that was brought to the table and then taken to the next level with our strategic plan. Within this, the voices of several DEI Council members have been present. And I can say that Will Kinsey, I know you're on here. I have to give a shout out to you. He's been one of my partners within this whole strategic planning process and in our council. He was at the forefront for bringing this program to life. And so with Summer Bridge, you may be aware, is bridging the gap between high school and college to ensure that those courses and the resources and support that are needed for success, our students are gaining that. And we conducted that this summer. And so being able to bring in pieces of what I learned through the Equity Academy was helpful here. And the last area, the campus climate survey for students. This is something that I reached back out to my cohort and asked, what are you doing? What tools and resources have you utilized to measure the campus climate for your students? We conducted similar surveys with our faculty and staff, the PACE survey, and many of you may have experienced that. And also we've had small focus groups with students to gain information about their experiences at the college. What we really needed though for our students was more explicit, more intentional pieces of a survey that we were able to gain about DEI specifically. Some of the surveys that we had in focus groups, they were generic. They offered the gateway to discuss DEI, but some of them were not as specific as we needed to even address an issue at the table. So being very explicit in what we're doing, we're in search. We have a few of those campus climate survey recommendations at the table. And our goal is through the council in the spring semester, which is in a few short weeks, to disseminate one of those surveys in order that we can elicit feedback. From there, not just to allow this data to sit, we want to take it a step further with having those focus groups to discuss, to dissect all of the feedback that we have been given. So pairing the survey with our focus groups is another strategy we're using to, again, help move that needle forward for student success. I'll turn it back over to you.
So we are pleased to announce that we will be having another cohort beginning in March of 2022. So I will be sending communications to presidents and chief academic officers next month. Applications will be due again in January. It will be a little bit of a different process, but we hope to engage 20 equity coaches again. This cohort had 20 equity coaches. Originally, we were funded to do 12, and we were able to secure additional funding to support 12. And the next cohort will also have 20. And the support that we were able to provide for our coaches, they received 2 stipend payments of $1,000 each for participating in this training, with the acknowledgement that they would take this information back to their college and use this and initiate or join in the process of DEI work that was going on at their community college. So we are excited. We are taking the feedback from our coaches and implementing those changes into the next equity coach training. So be on the lookout for that announcement very soon. And I think at this point, we'd like to open it up if you have questions for us that maybe we didn't get answer. And this is our contact information if you want to reach out to any of us.
Just monitoring the chat here. Looks like Gregory Lewis was just making a comment earlier that he has worked through and tried to work through addressing the topic at Durham public schools and going through the same experience of difficulty regarding that. Open for questions. You guys are welcome to put them in the chat.
Hello, my name is Katina Galloway. I am from Guilford Tech Community College. And my question is about the new cohort for equity coaches. Do we have any idea of how that process will be for choosing those who are able to be a part of 2022's cohort?
Yes, so I'm sending it out to all 58 community colleges. We are trying to give preference to colleges who did not participate in the first cohort. So we'd have a better, so we're trying to train all 58. The selection process this time, we had an outside group who evaluated the questions and scored them. Someone from the system office, someone from the Success Center, and someone from the Belk Center were our scoring masters. And then based on the score. So the scoring was based on the answers to the 3 questions. And so that same type of process will be the same process, not necessarily the full letter of recommendation from your president or your chief academic officer, but some acknowledgement that they will support you and give you the time needed in order to come to these trainings. And some of them will be face-to-face. That was some of the feedback that we received. Because of COVID, all of our trainings were virtual, but we are planning to implement at least 1 or 2 face-to-face sessions to give people an opportunity to meet each other and to do some team building activities in addition to the equity work. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Going once. Oh, we got, we have one. What suggestions do you have for mid-level administrators when courageous conversations can take place within the campus DEI committee? Specifically, when a committee member questions the purpose and efforts of the committee in the front of the college president, and it's not I think I cut off. Oh, and it's not. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the purpose of the committee in front of the college president.
So my suggestion for someone who's a mid-level administrator would be to have a one-on-one conversation with the college president about the goals and the objectives of the DEI committee, and then maybe talk about a communication to the college that clearly addresses that. So maybe it was an uncomfortable situation where the president maybe didn't feel comfortable addressing it at that point, but maybe bringing it back up and maybe even going to the president with a mock-up of an email that could be sent to the college community about the purpose of this committee, what the goals are, what the objectives are, and what you're trying to gain from that, and share that with the whole community, and maybe gain some traction there. I think if you don't have support from your administrators, then it makes the work a lot more difficult. But if you have the support of the president, the chief academic officer, the people in the leadership positions, and it trickles down to as an important objective and goal for the college.
I don't
Some
see
great comments in the chat.
Actually, picking through that, when in regard to the piece that does stick out the most in our last comment is, genuinely moving beyond talk. I think that's a very powerful statement to make, and what this group is sharing so much from what you've taken and brought back to your institutions.
Well, I mean, I do understand, and I think I probably am I was always the most eager and ready to fight like person, wanting this thing to happen here and now, and so the events and where we are in terms of like nationally, internationally, and otherwise with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, mistreatment, all the above, has occurred over a long period of time. I do think it will take time, unfortunately. I mean, I am with you, like, if we could just snap your finger, go do it, I'm ready and willing to go. However, because the unincluded and all the others are not at the table. So, you know, diversity, and this is from the quoting from the Harvard Business. So diversity is having a seat at the table, and inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having a voice be heard. And that's sort of like where it is with regards to this. So we know all these things and we want all these things to change, but it's sort of from the outside in, there is sort of not like that much we can do unless we get to the table, unless we get the voice. And that becomes when enough people. So, you know, getting allies, getting to that place where we can enact these changes in terms of rules, regulation, laws, all of those. So it just takes allyship, so building as many allies as we can to get to that point.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think I used to teach history here at SCC, and I've been listening and reflecting a lot on the 1619 project, and just the idea, there's just a lot that has to change. And I personally believe it starts with building relationships. One thing that critical race theory, I don't know why we're calling it a theory. It's history. And I think that the labeling, the language all has to change. And that's something that, you know, as I continue to read Equity, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, I think that would be the best choice. This takes it from an administrative standpoint in community colleges, how we address the gaps in the United States and the world. I don't know. All I know is what I can do on the day to day, and that's what I can do. I think you're absolutely right. We're learning. We're all learning, and at least we're talking about it. We're finally talking about it.
Yeah, so adding a little bit to what Savvy said, so I mean, just from a different perspective or standpoint, so CRT and like all the, so again, so changing the narrative, so it becomes difficult, but when we get ownership, so first we have to know what it is we're talking about or fighting for. So educating ourselves is one of those. And so right now, and it's just sort of playing on the word, but it's sort of like the world I grew up in, and so how I see things. So what Savvy learned, or what is in public school or in public institution, that's his story. But my story is there. And so if I know my story, then I can do a lot more and say a lot more. So for me, I know my story. I know the history of science, mathematics. I know the geometry upon which the Great Pyramid was built. I know these things. And that comes from educating myself, finding out about myself. And once if we use the phrase that is written just outside of the Luxor temple in Egypt, that says, man, know thyself. So if we get to that point, then I think we can make a greater impact. And because reading the necessary thing, knowing your story as it is, so it doesn't become like strange, and then we could fight for what it is that we need to, but we first need to educate ourselves.
Now, I cannot see the chat on my end, but I think the comment was, what does a mid-level administrator do in a situation where maybe a DEI concern was brought to the table in front of the college president? Am I on track there?
Yes, Laura. And then
Okay.
there was a follow-up piece to it at the end that says, what exactly can I do when something like that, what happens that way with that mid-level role?
Understood there. So one thing that I would bring to light is look at it two ways. In addressing the concern, I'm not sure if it was being addressed to the president or to an individual making the comment, but looking at what is the consequence of not addressing, not speaking, not standing up for whatever concern was brought to the table. So thinking about that, then how do I stand up in this situation, whether it's to a colleague or to the president? And the piece about being bold and brave has to come into play. And that could be, and I know Dr. Battle mentioned, a side conversation could take place just to clarify. Let me, want to clarify in the session, there was a discussion regarding whatever the case is on racism. It was not addressed or it was massaged over. Being able to say that and acknowledge it, acknowledgement is everything. Being able to acknowledge what was not done is just as valuable as acknowledging what was great and what was impactful. I was impacted by not having the voice or not hearing directly from whomever you were speaking at. But just think about what's the consequences of not. Who is not benefiting? Who is not being supported or served in this arena, whatever we're dealing with here? So having that sidebar conversation, definitely to clarify or to bring to light, maybe there was a point here that we all need to be educated about, that we all need to bring forth back to the entire college community, because more than probably just me needed that clarification. So just leaning out there, what's the consequences of not stepping forth, not taking that stand and addressing? Now you're gonna have some folks like Michael that'll stand up right then in the session and say, hold up. What we're not gonna do is, but everybody can't flow like Michael, right? And so within that, just going with who you are, what is your level of comfort in moving forward the conversation? But having that courageous conversation is vital. Hopefully that was helpful for whoever made that comment. I'm sorry, I can't see it in the chat.
What other questions do we have? I always find it to be the most raw and real, or epiphany rocks caught when we do have the question and answer period. So is there anything else? Anybody have any other questions? All right. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Battle, Laura, Michael, and Savvy for your insight and time. And I'm sure I was over here nodding a couple times. I caught myself. So I've loved the session. I'm very thankful for your time and for being with us today.
Thank you
It
all.
was our pleasure.
Thank you guys for having us, and thanks for listening, and hope we made an impact.
Yes, and definitely contact us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Conference.
Have a good one.